welcome back to Otaku no Video. As always, thank you very much for joining me, where I'm digging deeper into the original Mobile Suit Gundam anime TV series. Now, in the previous video, I talked about some of the major themes of the original Mobile Suit Gundam show, and today I want to talk about some of the major scenes and sequences in that series and how they relate to those themes. And for me, the big one centering on the theme of responsibility, which I think is the main theme of the series. The big scene is the famous Bright slap. That's right, the sequence where Bright comes in and sees Amuro, and Amuro is being basically a whiny, complaining jerk, and Bright comes in and just slaps him across the face. Twice. Not very common to see an adult slapping a teenager in anything. And of course, we get the moment when Amuro says, "You hit me! My own father never even hit me." And then Bright turns around and says, "I don't have time for this. You need to grow up real fast, Amuro." And it's an amazing sequence. Again, we don't see this that often, but so why is it there? It's there because Amuro refused to pilot the Gundam. And Amuro's point was that he didn't sign up for this, he didn't want to do this, he just happens to be the only one who can do it. And Bright's perspective is that's exactly true, and that's exactly why Amuro needs to pilot the Gundam, and why complaining is just kind of pointless, and stopping piloting is endangering people. It's a bad thing. And Bright is really concerned about this. So one of the interesting things is that Amuro complains a lot, and Bright sort of corrects him, but doesn't do anything beyond that. It's when Amuro says, "I'm not going to pilot anymore," that all of a sudden, whoa, we need to do something. And it's that line from Bright. You have to grow up fast. That is one of the keys of Mobile Suit Gundam, is that yes, Amuro does have to grow up fast. On the other hand, he is 15. It is time for him to grow up. And it's really important in this sequence, or in this series as a whole, to understand that this is about growing up. A very, very important sequence, and again, shocking and important. Similarly, but in a very different vein, is a little moment from later on in the series when Sleggar Law, the pilot, is seeing how Mirai's, the man that she's engaged to, her fiancé, is treating her, and how she doesn't really want to be involved with him, and he keeps insisting. And Sleggar wonderfully goes up to the guy, and they're actually in a weightless environment, goes up to the guy, very politely pulls off his glasses, punches him in the nose, and then sends his glasses back. And says something along the lines of, "Hey, the lady says she's not interested right now." And it's a perfect moment of showing respect. Another major theme of Gundam is this idea of understanding other people and respecting them. It's what the Zabis don't do. It's what Amuro is constantly trying to find within himself, the ability to understand people. Amuro's constantly struggling with this idea of how to identify with other people. Why are people doing what they're doing? And it's a very difficult thing to understand in any sort of major conflict like this. And it's something that the series is always working with. You see this throughout, especially the later part of the show, where the characters come together and are trying to understand battle tactics and strategy, and why people are doing what they're doing, and why they're being assigned to what they're being assigned to. That empathy is very important. Indeed, it is a new type power. So Sleggar's punch is a wonderful moment where Sleggar is able to come in and very dramatically demonstrate when this fiancé is going way out of line, and how he needs to, okay, stop, go away for a while. Again, it's important, and it's well done. Sleggar is not angry, particularly. It's a way of getting his point across in a rather physical but awesome way. Then there's the theme of war and how it kind of makes people crazy. And probably the most obvious example of this would be Char's murder of Garma Zabi. A lot of G's in the Zabi family. Anyway, so quick recap. We see that Garma and Char are friends. And we've seen Char up to this point. Char is this pretty honorable, respected guy, and quite awesome, frankly. And they're seen, Char and Garma chat, and they talk and so forth, and they seem to like each other. And then Char sabotages Garma's ship, and as Garma is going down, Char bursts into maniacal laughter. Hello! This is probably the first moment in Gundam when we're really shocked, when something happens that we don't understand. And it really turns our understanding of the series, that the show is willing to do things that doesn't make sense on the surface, but is explained later. And it also shows us that Char is not simply this rugged pilot type guy, rugged commander. He has some real issues and some weird things he's doing. It's remarkable for a populist show, a show that's trying to be pop culture, to be willing to throw a monkey wrench like that at the viewer. And I give Gundam full credit for doing so. It is a shocking sequence. And then, of course, that leads into the sequence in which, Garma's funeral and Giran Zabi's Sig-Zeon speech. This is one of the great speeches in anime history, frankly, gone on to be referenced in many different other works. And it's remarkable partly because it really showcases how individual events can be used to rally people to a particular viewpoint. Garma Zabi's death is pointless. There was nothing inherently impressive about it, other than the fact that he is willing to go down with the ship. And Giran manages to turn that into a rallying cry for his people. And there's obvious Nazi imagery in that. And again, indeed, Giran is called a little Hitler by his father. And I think that's there partly to remind us that things like Nazism have become sensationalized. And we tend to forget that Nazism was a real movement. People actually went to rallies. It built. It didn't just spring out of nowhere. People invented it, and it grew from a small group to a large group. Those sorts of things do happen. People do capitalize on those events to tell those kinds of stories and to create those sorts of movements. And that's what you've got to be careful of, that sometimes stories can be twisted and made dangerous. Then there's the theme of family, which runs through Mobile Suit Gundam particularly, not so much in other Gundam series. But Amuro is one of the rare Gundam pilots, rare mecha pilots, who has both a father and a mother. Now, of course, his father is kind of gone for a while. Something I didn't catch the first time through is that when Amuro is talking with his father, and when Amuro blows the hole accidentally in the side of the colony, the people that you see getting sucked out, one of them is his father. So he's kind of indirectly responsible for his father going into space, getting that space sickness that we see later on in the series, where his father's just mindless, essentially, just tinkering around with bits of junk. And it's this scary moment, and it gets back to also one of those elements of Gundam, of space being this dangerous frontier, that there's this idea that in a moment you can get pulled out into space and suddenly die, or just get your mind blown out, basically. This is a scary place to be. And this idea that Amuro, who really lives and dies based on his mind, and not just his new type powers, but also his ability to think. When his new type powers fail, it is his ability to predict his enemy, to outthink his enemy, that makes Amuro so successful. So seeing what happens to his father is this very scary moment, and especially since Amuro has been thinking about his father, wondering about his father, and has been living with this crew for so long, seeing that his father is now this shell of a man, again, shocking, and something that anime typically didn't do, unless it's a really dark and depressing anime series. But again, it's very good. And then, of course, Amuro and his mother, when he goes back and sees his mother. And there's that whole scene surrounding that where Amuro comes back home and finally sees the house that he grew up in on Earth during his youngest, most formative age. And a bunch of Fetty soldiers are in there having an orgy, basically. They're on R&R, and they found this, what seemed to be an empty house. And they dragged in some women. And that scene is partly there to remind us that this is not simply good guys versus bad guys. You know, Federation soldiers can be just as unpleasant as anyone else. And the thing about Gundam is that constant reminder that there is good and evil, but people can be drawn in either way. And it's that realism, which is one of the reasons that made Gundam so, I think, so popular and so different. That this is what soldiers do a lot of the times, even ones that we, think are good. This is very real. And then he spends that time with his mother, and that whole, there's a lot in that sequence that you could unpack about how people don't trust him, how Amuro himself, how his mother's trying to protect him, and how his mother is very scared of Amuro. She loves him, clearly, but she sees what he's become as this soldier. And his view is, I've become this soldier because I have to protect myself. And if he wanted to kill me, I had to defend myself. And his mother has this simplified pacifist view that Amuro now rejects. And interestingly, Amuro has been toying with that view for quite a while. And it's a viewpoint that comes up in mecha and anime a lot, that you be nice to everyone, then everyone's nice. And Amuro's view is that there are some people who aren't nice like that, unfortunately, who can't just be pulled around by that ideology, sadly. And then, of course, that horrible image, frankly, of White Base lifting off, leaving behind his mother. I saw an image from New Type and some text where the original character designer was talking about it, and where he said he believes that image is really the core of original Gundam, of leaving behind your childhood, your mother, and finding a new life, and finding a new life in this group and in defense of what you find important, and leaving the mother behind so that she will be safe. It's very interesting. I'm sure there's some Japanese things in there too, which I'm probably not getting. So, Gundam is good, Gundam is deep, but Gundam can also be really, really cheesy. Let's be honest. Beginning with the heroic death of Rio. Yeah. And again, nothing against. It's a dramatic sequence. But the interesting thing about that, the Go Nagai mecha anime had established the fact that you could have characters die. You could have good guys die. But it was never the fun-loving fat guy. It could be the rogue. It could be the old professor, things like that. But a character like Ryu wouldn't die because there was no reason for Ryu to die. Earlier anime series were very simplistic, morally simplistic. Well, not just morally simplistic, but morally direct. That the characters who died were characters who'd done something that required some kind of payment. Maybe not something that required death, but something morally ambiguous at least. Ryu doesn't do that. Ryu's a nice guy. Ryu's good, and he dies. And it's less of a shock for us today in the era of Akira and Ghost in the Shell and Cowboy Bebop and a much more moralistically gray universe. But especially back in 1979, that was just something you didn't do. They'd never seen that before, really, outside of shows like Captain Harlock or Galaxy Express, which were explicitly, different. Anyway, wow, they kill somebody who's just there. Now, this leads to a very over-the-top sequence. That's fine, because it would be arguably pushed even further with Matilda Side! Now, again, nothing against that, and that gets back to that point. Matilda-san was respectful, honorable, someone you really liked, who never did anything wrong that we could see. And she just dies because she's in the wrong place at the wrong time. Very much like the military, very much like real war. Now moving on to some of the more remarkable sequences that aren't really necessarily tied directly into some of these themes. The assault on the assault on White Base. The assault on Nerve and Evangelion, not at all inspired by this sequence. I don't know what you're talking about. Anyway, so Rambaral initiates this successful assault on White Base, or successful in the sense that he gets on and he does some real significant damage. And again, this is an interesting sequence because we see that White Base is not just this impregnable fortress. It's a ship like any other, and bad guys can get on, especially a really smart bad guy. One of the things I love about Gundam are characters like Rambaral. He's working for the bad guys, but you really respect him. He's a very impressive character, both in terms of being an interesting person and being a multifaceted person, and of also being smart and a really effective soldier. And he gets on White Base, and he starts killing people. And it's all part of, this is war. And people just get shot down right and left. It's really, really nasty. And it brings it home. The mecha can't save them while they're in the hallways of White Base. Again, this is where Gundam pulls away from traditional mecha in a sense, where in a mecha series, the heroes are usually fighting in the giant robot, and especially when they're fighting big enemies, they're fighting inside the giant robots. Now all of a sudden, it's pistols in a hallway, and you can just get shot and fall over and die, period. And that makes it much more real in a very important way. And of course, there's the Zabi family. And in the Zabi family, you could probably write a book psychoanalyzing these characters. There's some very interesting stuff about Gihren in the Mobile Suit Gundam novels that Tomino wrote, by the way. Anyway, one of the really remarkable moments is where Gihren kills Degwin Zabi, where Degwin is going off to broker peace with the Fedis, and Gihren decides to use the colony laser of the series. I know it's not technically whatever, but he decides to use the mega laser of the series on Degwin and on that Federation fleet. He murders his father for his political gains, and it reminds us of what and who Gihren is. And in this universe of gray, if you will, of characters with complex motivations, that's a better way of putting it, Giren's evil. It's one of the reasons why we want to see him dead. And he's pretty irredeemable. That shows that there's something about him that goes beyond simply letting people die for his gains. He knows exactly what he's doing, knows exactly who's dying, and he knows he is letting a good man, or a potentially good man, die. He is literally murdering in the worst sense of the word. And again, I appreciate the fact that the Gundam's willing to go back in that direction too. All in one series, jeez. And then the wonderful, stunning moment when Cassilia kills Gihren. And just that whole back and forth where Cassilia says, Cassilia asks him about that whole, what's going on, and Gihren tells her, and she said, interesting. I forget the exact lines. Actually, I think it was along the lines of, I wish you hadn't told me that, pulls out a gun, shoots him. And again, this gets back to the point where death does not come at the hands of a mecha. It comes in the hands of someone just pulling out a gun and shooting you. And then Gihren just flies back, and everyone looks. And there's that wonderful tech guy who stands up and says, I have witnessed what was it? I witnessed the execution of the traitor Gihren Zabi. Very politically savvy guy there, but also saying, I know exactly what just happened, and I think you were absolutely right, and what do you want to do now? You're now the leader. It's brilliant, brilliant writing there. And also, I just love the whole editing of that sequence. It's very stark. It's very simple. Gihren gets shot by his sister. And it's one of those brilliant things that Gihren never realized. I mean, he was always careful to distance himself from his family. But at the same time, he never really saw them as that kind of a threat. As people with those sorts of moral views. It's often the downfall of dictators. Because they have few morals themselves, they don't believe in the morals of others. They don't believe that those are capable of bringing them down. And ultimately they are. So those are some of the major sequences in Gundam. There are others, of course, I could talk about, but those are the ones that really tie into the themes I want to talk about. So stay tuned for the next part of this video, where I talk about some of the major characters of Gundam, and I delve into them in some depth and talk about how they integrate into the series. So hope you stay tuned. See you then.